He thought she was just the chauffeur's daughter, someone invisible, someone unimportant. But the moment she touched the piano, every guest at the Billionaire's gala froze, and his entire world turned upside down. What happened that night shocked the richest family in the city and changed her life forever. Asterisk, the city had a strange way of looking different depending on who you were. For the rich, it was a playground, glittering skyscrapers, boutique shops spilling warm light onto spotless sidewalks, and cars so polished they mirrored the sky. But for people like James Carter, it was a maze of endless workdays, narrow paychecks, and dreams he dared not speak aloud. That Saturday morning, James stood in the cramped kitchen of his two-bedroom apartment, buttoning the crisp white shirt of his chauffeur's uniform. The sound of bacon sizzling in the pan filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of the old refrigerator. At the small dining table sat Amara, his 14-year-old daughter, her elbows on the wood, chin resting in her palms. "Dad, why do you have to work on a Saturday?" she asked softly. James glanced at her with a tired smile. "When your boss is Richard Huxley, you don't ask why, sweetheart. You just show up." The name Huxley hung in the room like a shadow. Richard wasn't just rich, he was untouchable. His fortune was built on shipping, real estate, and investments, so sprawling that even the newspapers didn't know their full reach. Every year, his estate hosted the city's most talked-about charity gala, where celebrities and power brokers mingled under crystal chandeliers. This year, James had been told the event would be larger than ever. Every member of staff was required, even the drivers, not just to park the guests' luxury cars, but to maintain an impeccable presence. It wasn't a request. James hadn't wanted to bring Amara, but with her mother working a double shift at the hospital and no relatives nearby, there was no choice. She was dressed simply, a sky blue dress her mother had sewn by hand. The fabric soft but slightly faded from careful washing. Her hair was neatly braided, her shoes polished. She didn't look like she belonged in the Huxley mansion, and she knew it. Still, there was a spark in her eyes as she picked at her breakfast. "Will there be famous people?" she asked. "Probably," James replied. "Will they be nice?" James paused. "Some will, some won't. Just stay close to me, okay?" The ride to the estate was long. The city's noise fell away as they drove past manicured lawns and towering iron gates. Amara stared out the window, her reflection caught between the glass and the blur of marble fountains and statues. Every property seemed larger than the last until they reached the Huxley estate. Calling it a house would have been like calling the ocean a puddle. The mansion stood 3 stories tall, its white stone walls gleaming in the late morning sun. Wide steps led up to towering, double doors carved with ornate patterns. The air smelled faintly of roses from the sprawling gardens, where a small army of landscapers worked in silence, trimming hedges to perfect symmetry. James slowed the car to a crawl. Already, the driveway was filling with gleaming vehicles. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, a rare Ferrari in a deep emerald green. Valets in black uniforms moved swiftly, opening doors for women in sparkling gowns and men in tuxedos that looked custom-made. Amara's hand tightened around the seatbelt strap. "It's huge," she whispered. James gave her a reassuring smile, though inside, he was just as overwhelmed. He'd been here before, but never during an event like this. The energy was different, electric, intimidating. He drove around to the side entrance reserved for staff, the one the guests never saw. The contrast was stark. Gone were the marble floors and gilded columns. Here, the ground was plain concrete, the air filled with the smell of cooking food and the shouts of catering staff. They stepped inside, the narrow hallway buzzing with movement. Waiters rushed past, balancing trays of champagne flutes. Kitchen assistants darted in and out with stacks of plates, and the head butler, Mr. Halbrook, strode by, barking orders with military precision. James kept a firm hand on Amara's shoulder. "Stay with me. Don't wander." But even as he said it, she couldn't help glancing through an open door into the main ballroom. For a moment, her breath caught. It was like stepping into another world. Golden chandeliers hung like constellations, their light scattering across polished marble floors. Round tables were draped in silk cloths, each crowned with floral arrangements so tall they almost hid the guests who would be seated there. At the far end stood a grand piano, its black surface reflecting the light like still water. She didn't know why, but her eyes locked on that piano. Something inside her stirred, a deep, unspoken longing. "Amara," her father's voice snapped her back. He was already walking toward the line of drivers gathering near the service area. She followed, weaving through the controlled chaos that, when it happened, from the corner of her eye, she caught sight of a group of teenagers near the edge of the ballroom. They were laughing, whispering, their eyes darting toward her. One of them, tall, perfectly styled hair, wearing a tuxedo that looked like it cost more than her father's annual salary, stepped forward. It was Ethan Huxley, the billionaire's only son. He tilted his head, a smirk playing on his lips. In that instant, Amara felt the first drop of unease in what would soon become a storm. She didn't know yet that this day would burn itself into her memory. She didn't know that the boy smirking at her now would, in a matter of hours, be forced to swallow every cruel word he was about to say. And she certainly didn't know that the piano she had just glimpsed would become the stage, where her entire life would change. Ethan Huxley didn't walk. He glided. Years of being told he was special, important, untouchable, had carved that arrogance into every step. His tuxedo was sharp enough to belong in a magazine, his shoes polished until they reflected the chandeliers above. But it wasn't his outfit. That made people step aside. It was his name. He was the Huxley heir, the son of the man who owned half the city. And now, his pale blue eyes were fixed on Amara. She tried to look away, but it was too late. He was already moving toward her, his small entourage of equally well-dressed friends trailing behind like shadows. Well, Ethan began, his voice loud enough for nearby staff to hear. If it isn't the driver's little princess, the words dripped with sarcasm. One of his friends, a boy with slicked-back blonde hair and the smugness only inherited wealth could buy, laughed. Nice dress, he said, giving it a slow, mocking glance from top to bottom. What is that? Hand-me-down from the thrift store. The boys chuckled, their laughter sharp and deliberate. Amara's fingers tightened around the small clutch bag she held. She wanted to speak, to say something, but her throat felt like it had closed. James, her father, was a few steps away, talking to the other drivers. He hadn't noticed what was happening. Amara's gaze flicked toward him for a brief moment, and Ethan caught it. Don't look at Daddy to save you, he teased, stepping closer. He's busy. Besides, this is just a little fun, right? Fun. That word. It was the same word she'd heard in school when the richer kids decided to make her a target. Fun when they hid her books. Fun when they tripped her in the cafeteria. It wasn't fun for her. Another boy chimed in. Hey Ethan, maybe she can entertain us. You know, like the staff does for the guests. Ever seen her carry a tray? Might be fun to watch. More laughter. Ethan tilted his head toward the ballroom. His eyes landed on the grand piano in the corner. The instrument seemed to gleam under the soft lights, its keys a line of perfect white teeth waiting to bite. I have a better idea, Ethan said suddenly, his grin widening. Tell you what, driver's daughter, why don't you play us a little something? You can play the piano, right? His tone was cruelly sweet, the kind adults use when they already know the answer and just want to see you squirm. Heart thudded in her chest. Could she play? Oh yes, she could. Better than anyone in that room probably realized. Her father had taught her on an old second-hand keyboard, the kind with a few missing keys and a hum in the speakers. She'd spent hours practicing, letting the music swallow her whole when the world felt too heavy. But this wasn't her garage. This was the Huxley ballroom, full of strangers in silk and diamonds, waiting for a famous pianist to arrive. And the invitation to play hadn't been out of kindness, it was a trap. Go on, Ethan pressed. Show us what you've got. Or are you afraid you'll break it? The boys laughed again, the sound bouncing off the marble walls. A few nearby guests turned their heads. Curious, the humiliation burned in Amara's chest. She considered walking away, just turning her back and following her father into the safety of the service hall, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Ethan's eyes shone with certainty, like he knew she'd back down. Maybe it was the memory of every cruel laugh she'd endured in silence. She took a slow breath. Fine, she said quietly. The laughter stopped for a split second, replaced by surprise. Ethan smirked. Perfect. Come on, princess. He led the way into the ballroom. The space was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the soft strains of background music from the hidden speakers. Guests glanced over as Ethan approached the stage, gesturing toward the piano like a showman introducing a novelty act. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan called out, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby tables. A little impromptu entertainment for you tonight. Please welcome our talented guest, Miss Amara Carter. The sarcasm dripped from his voice. A few guests smiled politely, thinking it was some sort of lighthearted moment. They didn't see the power play underneath. Amara walked toward the piano, her steps steady but her stomach in knots. Every footstep seemed to echo. The air felt heavier the closer she got. She could feel Ethan's gaze burning into her back, the smug assurance that she'd embarrass herself and give him a story to laugh about for weeks. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a second, she thought about pretending she didn't know how to play, hitting a few random notes, and leaving. That would be safe. But then she saw her father through the open doorway to the service hall. He had stopped mid-conversation, watching her with a puzzled look. This was her chance, not just to prove Ethan wrong, but to show her father something he'd never seen before. Ethan leaned against the piano, his voice just loud enough for her to hear. No pressure, princess, just don't mess it up. Amara's fingers touched the cool ivory keys. She closed her eyes, letting the noise of the room fade into nothing. She remembered the old keyboard in the garage, the smell of oil from her father's tools, the way the music had been her refuge on days when the world was unkind. She took another deep breath, and then she played a single note. It rang out clear and pure. Heads turned, conversations paused. The sound, so simple yet so confident, caught the attention of people who had been too busy sipping champagne to notice a young girl at the piano. Ethan's smirk faltered just slightly. Amara didn't see it. She was already lost in the memory of every melody she'd ever loved, her hands beginning to move with the precision and passion of someone who had spent years waiting for this exact moment. And as the first notes of a haunting, beautiful melody filled the ballroom, no one could have guessed what was about to happen next. The ballroom felt like it belonged to another world. Silk gowns rustled as women moved gracefully between conversations, their laughter blending with the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. Waiters glided silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays laden with champagne. The golden glow of chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, yet for Amara, standing on the edge of it all, the air felt sharp and cold. And then, cutting through the hum of polite conversation, came Ethan Huxley's voice. He was standing just a few steps away now, his friends forming a loose half-circle around him, their eyes glinting with amusement. "So," Ethan began, his tone dripping with casual superiority, "I hear you're our chauffeur's daughter." Amara didn't answer. She kept her gaze low, hoping to slip away before things turned ugly. But Ethan wasn't going to let her leave. "I was just telling my friends," he continued, loud enough for a few nearby guests to overhear, "how you probably don't even know what a grand piano is, let alone how to play one." A ripple of laughter spread through his group. One of his friends, a boy with dark hair and a voice that oozed mockery, added, "Maybe she could polish it, you know, like her dad polishes the car." Another chimed in, "Or she could serve drinks on it." The laughter grew. Amara's heart pounded, her hands curling into fists at her sides. She wanted to tell them they were wrong, that she did know how to play. That music was the one place she felt truly alive. But she could already picture the outcome. More laughter, more mockery. Ethan, sensing her silence, leaned in slightly. His voice was quieter now, but sharper. "What's the matter? Afraid to embarrass yourself?" Then his gaze shifted across the room, landing on the grand piano at the far end of the ballroom. It was a magnificent thing, polished ebony, the curve of its body like the arc of a wave, its keys gleaming under the spotlight. A slow smile spread across his face. "Tell you what," he said, straightening. "Why don't you go over there and give us a song? Right now. Let's see what you've got, if you've got anything at all." The suggestion hung in the air like a dare. Amara's first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't afraid of the piano, she was afraid of them. The room was full of strangers in gowns and tuxedos. People who would look at her and see only the daughter of the help. Playing in front of them felt like stepping onto a battlefield without armor. But then she thought of her father. James was still near the side entrance, talking to another driver, unaware of what was happening. He had spent his life working hard, quietly enduring the way people like the Huxleys looked down on him. And maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to change that. Ethan clearly didn't expect her to accept. His smirk told her he was sure she would back down. That smirk lit something inside her. A spark of defiance. She lifted her chin. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, Ethan looked surprised. He tried to cover it with a laugh. "Oh, this is going to be good." They crossed the ballroom together, Ethan walking with exaggerated confidence while Amara's steps were slower, deliberate. Conversations around them began to quiet as people noticed the unlikely procession heading toward the piano. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances, whispering to one another. By the time they reached the small stage where the piano sat, the attention of at least half the room had shifted toward them. Ethan gestured toward the bench with mock politeness. "Ladies first." Amara slid onto the seat, her fingertips brushing the smooth ivory keys. A jolt of memory hit her, the smell of oil in the garage where her father kept the old keyboard, the rickety stool she used to sit on, the way music had always been her escape from the world's unkindness. But this was no battered keyboard. This was a Steinway, its voice capable of filling the entire ballroom with a single chord. "Any day now," Ethan said, his voice loud enough to draw another round of polite chuckles from nearby guests. Amara ignored him. She closed her eyes and took a long, slow breath. The laughter, the whispers, even the faint clinking of glasses, it all began to fade. In its place, she heard the music in her mind, notes flowing like water, waiting to be released. She placed her hands on the keys. The first note rang out, clear, strong, resonant. A few heads turned. The clarity of that single sound, the confidence in it, was unexpected. Amara's fingers moved to the next chord, then the next, and suddenly the air in the room shifted. The conversations quieted. The background noise dimmed, as if the music itself was pulling every ear toward her. Ethan, standing to her side, frowned slightly. This wasn't the timid fumbling he'd hoped for. Amara let herself go deeper into the melody. Her fingers danced across the keys, each note blending into the next with precision and emotion. It was a piece her father had taught her, one she had played 100 times, but never like this. This time, every note carried her story, the struggles, the small victories, the quiet dreams she'd never spoken aloud. The room was still now. People who had been halfway through conversations were staring, champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. The soft glow of the chandeliers seemed to wrap around her like a spotlight. When the final chord faded into silence, there was a heartbeat where no one moved. Then applause. Not polite clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic applause that grew into a standing ovation from several tables. Amara sat frozen for a moment, her heart pounding, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't played for applause. She had played because it was the only way she knew to answer the cruelty thrown at her. But the applause was nice. Ethan's face was a mask of something she couldn't quite read, a mix of disbelief, irritation, and something else. Maybe even respect, though he'd never admit it. She stood from the bench and walked past him without a word. She didn't need one. The music had said everything. Asterisk. For a long moment, Amara didn't move. Her hands hovered over the keys like a diver poised at the edge of a cliff. The crowd below, murmuring in anticipation. She could feel every eye on her, some curious, some skeptical, some already certain she would fail. The chandeliers above cast a warm golden glow across the piano, its polished surface reflecting her face back at her, smaller, almost fragile. But inside, she was far from fragile. Inside, there was fire. She took a deep breath and let her fingers press the first note. It rang out in the vast ballroom, clean, pure, a single drop of sound in a room so silent it felt sacred. The note lingered, vibrating through the air, and then she struck the next. A chord followed, rich and resonant, filling the space between marble walls. Her fingers began to move in a slow, deliberate pattern, like someone telling a story they've waited their whole life to share. At first, the music was soft, tentative, almost a whisper. People leaned forward slightly, as if trying to catch a secret. The melody curled gently around the edges of the room, touching the ears of the waiters who had paused mid-step, the guests who had been too busy with idle chatter to notice her. Before the faintest shift in energy rippled through the crowd. Amara's eyes closed. In her mind, she wasn't in the Huxley ballroom anymore. She was back in the garage of their apartment building, where the old keyboard sat perched on a shaky, wooden table. She could smell the faint scent of oil and dust, hear her father's voice as he coached her, feel the uneven plastic of the worn-out keys beneath her fingers. Her father had told her once, music isn't about the notes, it's about the spaces between them. That's where the feeling lives. And now, in this gilded room full of strangers, she filled those spaces with every piece of her soul. The melody began to grow. The soft whisper became a steady voice. Her fingers moved faster, weaving notes together like silk threads, lifting the music higher and higher. The sound wrapped itself around the listeners, pulling them into her world. A woman in a glittering silver gown lowered her glass slowly, eyes fixed on the young girl at the piano. At the back of the room, a man stopped mid-conversation, his mouth slightly open. Even the head butler, who rarely broke from his duties, stood still in the doorway, watching. Ethan, standing just off to the side, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what he had pictured when he'd challenged her. He had imagined clumsy fumbling, an awkward smile, maybe even tears of humiliation. Instead, he was watching her command the room in a way he never had. But Amara wasn't thinking about him anymore. The music swelled, spilling emotion into every corner of the ballroom. The melody shifted into something deeper, sadder, a reflection of years spent watching her father work in the shadows of men like Richard Huxley, of hearing her mother come home from night shifts too tired to eat, of feeling invisible in a city that celebrated only the wealthy. Every keystroke was a confession, every note was a truth she couldn't speak aloud. And then, without warning, she let the music shift again, the sadness giving way to something fierce, triumphant. The chords grew bolder, her hands striking the keys with precision and power. It was as though she was breaking free of invisible chains, rising from the ground, daring anyone to push her back down. The guests felt it. They didn't just hear the music, they felt it in their chests, a tightening that made them forget to breathe for a moment. By now, the entire room was silent, not the silence of disinterest, but the kind that comes when no one dares to break a spell. The only movement was Amara's hands, gliding effortlessly over the ivory and ebony keys, her posture straight but relaxed, her face calm yet alive with intensity. Near the service entrance, James Carter had stopped in his tracks. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Pride swelled in his chest, mingling with something sharper, a recognition that this was more than just a song. This was his daughter standing up to the world in her own way. The final section came like the last chapter of a gripping story. The melody climbed higher, building tension, the notes cascading like waves in a storm. Then, with a breathless pause, she struck the final chord, a sound so full and resonant that it seemed to hang in the air, refusing to let go. Silence. It lasted just a moment, but it was long enough for Amara to open her eyes and meet the gaze of the room. Faces stared back at her, some in awe, some with softened expressions, some blinking as if waking from a dream. Then the applause began. It started with a single pair of hands, then another, and another. Within seconds, the ballroom erupted into thunderous clapping, the kind that shakes the floor. People rose from their seats, a standing ovation washing over her like a warm tide. Even those who had barely noticed her before now looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Amara stood slowly from the bench. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from the adrenaline of having poured herself out into the music and seeing it received with such force. Ethan's friends had gone silent, their smug grins wiped clean. Ethan himself stood frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between her and the crowd as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. From the back of the room, James Carter watched with tears in his eyes. She had done it. She had taken a moment meant to humiliate her and turned it into a triumph no one could ignore. Amara stepped down from the stage, walking past Ethan without a word. She didn't need one. The echo of the applause followed her like a crown. She didn't know it yet, but this performance would not only change the way people in that room saw her, it would set into motion a chain of events that would alter her future forever. The applause still thundered in Amara's ears long after she had stepped away from the grand piano. It wasn't the polite clapping of an audience ticking off a performance before the real event began. It was genuine, unrestrained, and rolling through the ballroom like a standing ovation at a sold-out concert. Every step she took back toward the service entrance felt surreal. The marble beneath her shoes, the warm golden light, the sea of faces, all of it seemed distant, almost dreamlike. But one thing she felt sharply, vividly, was the rush of adrenaline pumping through her veins. She had done it. At the edge of the crowd, Ethan Huxley stood frozen. The smug grin he'd worn all evening was gone, replaced by something unreadable, part shock, part discomfort, part was it admiration. He didn't clap. He didn't say a word. His friends, who had been so quick to laugh earlier, now kept their eyes low, shifting awkwardly in the heavy silence around them. It was as if they were afraid to meet Amara's gaze. Amara didn't look at them. She didn't need to. The music had spoken louder than any words ever could. From across the room, she spotted her father. James Carter stood at the service entrance, his posture rigid, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. In all the years she had known him, she had never seen that look on his face, a mix of pride, awe, and something deeper, something almost like relief. He met her gaze and nodded once. No smile, no grand gesture, just a quiet nod, as if to say, "You did it." And I saw. As the applause began to fade, a new sound rose. The deliberate click of polished shoes against marble. The crowd parted like water, and Richard Huxley himself emerged from the far side of the ballroom. The billionaire was an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered with silver hair perfectly combed back, and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. His presence commanded attention. Even the waiters seemed to stand straighter when he passed. He stopped in front of Amara, studying her for a moment. She felt her breath catch. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was deep, smooth, and measured. Amara swallowed. "My father taught me. On an old keyboard. In our garage." For the first time, Richard's stern face softened. He glanced over at James, as if reassessing a man he thought he already knew. "And you've never had formal lessons?" "No, sir." He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Then, to the shock of nearly everyone in the room, he smiled. "Talent like that shouldn't be wasted," Richard said. "I'll see to it that you have a full scholarship to the Whitmore Conservatory. Private tutoring, instruments, everything you need. Starting immediately." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's the top music school in the state." Amara's heart raced. The Whitmore Conservatory was the kind of place where students were groomed for international stages. It was a dream she had never dared to dream for herself. Until now. Ethan shifted uncomfortably at his father's side. Richard noticed, turning to his son with a raised brow. "I hope you applauded," Richard said coolly. "It's important to recognize excellence, even when it surprises you." Ethan muttered something that might have been agreement. His face red. Richard returned his attention to Amara. "I'll have my assistant reach out to your family tomorrow. You'll need proper training, and the best instruments money can buy. Consider this an investment in your future." For a moment, Amara was too stunned to reply. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on her. Finally, she managed a quiet, "Thank you, sir." James stepped forward, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Mr. Huxley, I don't know what to say." Richard gave him a small nod. "Say nothing, just make sure she keeps playing." And just like that, Richard Huxley turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving a trail of murmurs and astonished glances in his wake. Amara stood still for a moment, processing what had just happened. She glanced at Ethan, whose jaw was clenched tight, and felt no need for revenge, no satisfaction in his discomfort. The victory wasn't about him anymore. Her father stepped closer. "I'm proud of you, Amara," he said quietly, his voice thick. "You didn't just play tonight, you spoke, and everyone heard you." She smiled, and for the first time that night, the tension in her chest loosened as the gala carried on. Guests approached her, strangers with kind smiles, offering compliments, asking questions, telling her how moved they'd been. One older woman in a gold dress took her hand and said, "Never let anyone make you feel small. My dear, you have a gift. Use it." The words stayed with her. Later that night, as James drove her home in the quiet hum of the black sedan, Amara looked out at the passing city lights. "Dad," she asked softly. "Yes, do you think I could really do it? Play for real?" James smiled faintly, eyes still on the road. "I think you already did." Somewhere in the distance, she could still hear the echo of the applause, feel the warmth of the spotlight, and see the faces of the people who had stood to honor her. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but for the first time in her life, she knew one thing for certain. She belonged on that stage, and no amount of arrogance, mockery, or prejudice would ever take that away from her again. Story is proof that the people we underestimate often hold the most extraordinary gifts. If her journey inspired you, hit the like button and share this video so more people hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because next time, I'll tell you another true story where the impossible became reality.